Hello and welcome to this delightful, clean, historical Western romance by Shelfie Publishing. We're thrilled to have you join us. Before we dive in, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Your support in these small ways helps us bring you more heartwarming romance stories at no cost. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself be swept away into a world of adventure, love, and unforgettable care. Enjoy! This audiobook is copyrighted by Shelfie Publishing. Chapter 1. Arrival in Granite Bluff. The stagecoach jolted over the uneven dirt road, its wheels creaking in protest as the hot midday sun beat down mercilessly. Kate Morgan gripped the edge of the window, her knuckles pale against the leather. The landscape outside was harsh and unforgiving, a sea of dry grass, scattered with sparse shrubs stretching to the horizon. In the distance, a few weathered buildings rose against the landscape, their once pristine paint now faded and peeling from the years of exposure. This was Granite Bluff, a town that felt as though it had been carved out of the earth by the will of its people, stubborn and resilient like the mountains behind it. Her heart raced as the stagecoach pulled closer to the small cluster of buildings. With each bump of the wagon's wheels, her anticipation grew. This was it. The beginning of her journey to prove herself. The opportunity to show this town that she, Catherine Morgan, was capable of much more than what her gender suggested. That she could be a doctor, despite the fact that no one in Granite Bluff had ever seen a woman in such a role before. As the coach skidded to a halt in front of the boarding house, Kate adjusted her bonnet and climbed down, her boots meeting the sun-baked earth with a soft thud. The dusty street before her stretched out in all its barren glory, a row of modest buildings lining each side. The heat hit her immediately, a suffocating wave that made the air feel thick, but she stood tall and firm. She wasn't here to cower under the heat or the town's wary gazes. She had a purpose. The townsfolk who lined the dusty street didn't seem to be in any rush. Their eyes followed her every move with a kind of idle curiosity, the clink of wagon wheels and the occasional low murmur filling the silence. A few women, dressed in faded calico dresses, whispered behind their hands, their gazes drifting toward her. Men with wide-brimmed hats tipped slightly down from their brows watched her with skeptical eyes as she stepped off the stagecoach. They stood like statues, their boots planted firmly in the ground, their arms folded in silent judgment. Kate gathered her resolve, squaring her shoulders as she adjusted her medical bag, feeling the weight of it as though it were her very lifeline. She had worked long and hard to get to this moment, and she would not allow herself to falter now, not even under the scrutiny of these strangers. A sharp voice broke the stillness. "Well, well, seems we've got ourselves a doctor." Mrs. Turner, the town's infamous busybody, approached with a brisk step, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. Her beady eyes studied Kate with an almost predatory intensity. "And who might you be, miss?" Mrs. Turner asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're a doctor, are you?" Kate nodded, her jaw set, meeting the woman's gaze without flinching. "I am," she said, her voice steady and clear, though her heart thudded in her chest. "Dr. Catherine Morgan." Mrs. Turner's eyebrows shot up, a thin line of disapproval etched across her face. "A woman doctor, you say? In Granite Bluff? Now, I've seen it all." She gave a slight huff, clearly unimpressed, before she turned and waddled off down the street, leaving Kate to stand in the stillness of her arrival. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of judgment, but Kate didn't let it rattle her. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. She wasn't here to win people over with niceties. She was here to prove her worth, not just as a doctor, but as someone who could carve a place for herself in a town that might never fully accept her. Kate's gaze drifted toward the modest boarding house across the street. She had already arranged her stay with Mr. Goodwin, the innkeeper, who had promised her a quiet room for the next few days while she sorted out her practice. She stepped forward, the sound of her boots crunching against the dry dirt, and made her way toward the entrance. Inside, the air was cooler, the dim light filtering through the lace curtains. The smell of bread and stew wafted from the small kitchen in the back. A tall man with gray hair and a friendly, albeit wary, smile stood behind the counter. He wiped his hands on his apron and extended one toward her. "Miss Morgan, I presume?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. "That's me," Kate replied, offering a warm but reserved smile. "I'm Mr. Goodwin," he said. "I've got a room ready for you, just upstairs. It's not much, but it'll do for now." Kate nodded, grateful. "Thank you." He led her up the narrow staircase, his heavy boots thudding against the wood. As they reached the top, Mr. Goodwin opened a door to a small room. It had the bare necessities, an old wooden dresser, a bed covered in faded linens, and a small window with a view of the street below. The room wasn't much, but it was enough. Mr. Goodwin stepped back, his hands resting on the doorframe as he looked her over, his expression turning a little more serious. "I should warn you, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice low. "The people here aren't exactly open-minded when it comes to changes. You'll have your work cut out for you, especially with Dr. Banning in town. He's the only doctor anyone here trusts." Kate's brow furrowed, but she didn't allow herself to show much concern. "I didn't come here to be liked," she said, placing her medical bag carefully on the dresser. "I came here to do my work and prove I can do it better than anyone else." Mr. Goodwin's eyes softened, a glimmer of understanding in his gaze. "Well, you've got courage, that's for sure. Just be careful. The town's been set in its ways for a long time." Kate nodded and smiled, more to herself than to him. She wasn't scared of Dr. Banning, or the town's resistance. She had made it this far, and she would see this through. Her bag sat before her, filled with instruments she had trained for years to master, and her heart held steady with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The door clicked shut behind Mr. Goodwin, and Kate stood alone in the quiet room, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. She could feel the uncertainty in the air, the skepticism that would shadow her every step, but it only made her more determined. The small town of Granite Bluff had no idea what it was in for. Kate Morgan was here to stay. Kate Morgan paused outside the small, weather-beaten storefront, taking in the peeling paint and cracked windows that lined Main Street. The building was nothing like the elegant, well-maintained structures she had grown accustomed to back east, but then again, nothing about Granite Bluff seemed to follow the rules of refinement. It was a town in need of change, and Kate had come here to be the one to deliver it. Her boots clicked against the dusty wooden sidewalk as she approached the merchant standing out front, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. He was an older man with thick gray hair and a furrowed brow, clearly used to the hard work that life in this town demanded. Kate straightened her spine, her hand instinctively resting on the leather strap of her medical bag. "I'm interested in renting this space," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of every word as if they were more than just a simple request. She needed this place. It would be the foundation of her practice, the place where she would prove that a woman could be just as capable as any man in a doctor's shoes. The merchant looked her up and down, his eyes narrowing slightly as though trying to size her up. "You're a doctor, huh?" he asked, his tone more skeptical than curious. "I am," Kate replied with a calm nod, meeting his gaze. "I'm looking to set up a practice here. This space would be perfect." He scratched his chin and glanced at the building, clearly weighing the offer. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, I'm not." Kate smiled, though it was a thin, tight smile. "I'm new in town. I'm hoping to make a positive change." The man grunted, seemingly unconvinced. "Well, you ain't the first one to think that. We've got a doctor already, Dr. Banning. He's been here long enough." "I don't know how much business there's going to be for you." His tone was rough, and Kate could feel the dismissive air that seemed to hang over the words. The town wasn't exactly bursting with goodwill for newcomers. "I understand," Kate said, her voice steady but firm. "But there's room for another doctor, especially one who can provide care to everyone, women, children, the elderly. Those who can't afford the high fees charged by Dr. Banning, I'll make sure to offer services for all of them." The merchant's skeptical look didn't change, but he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Kate knew the next part of the conversation would hinge on the practicality of the space. "How much are you asking for rent?" she asked, her voice calm but with a slight edge of urgency. $100 a month. This place ain't much, but it's got a roof over it. You won't be able to run a fancy clinic in here, not with what you're paying." Kate nodded, already knowing she couldn't afford the extravagant rates some places might demand, but this was within reach. She reached into her bag, pulling out the small stack of bills she had left from her savings back east, all she had to her name. The amount was less than she wanted, but it was all she could spare. She held it out to the man. "I'll take it," she said. He took the money with a grunt, pocketing it without another word. "All right then, Doc, you've got yourself a place." She stood there for a moment, the silence settling between them as he turned back to the goods in front of his shop. Kat took a deep breath and stepped into the space that would soon become her clinic. The air inside was stale, and the wooden floors creaked under her boots as she walked the length of the room. It was a far cry from the sterile rooms she had once trained in, but it had potential. She could see it bright, welcoming walls, shelves stocked with medical supplies, a sturdy table for examination. As she stepped deeper into the space, her gaze flicked to the street outside, and that was when she saw it. A woman, stumbling slightly, holding a child in her arms, the little one's face pale and drawn. Kate's instincts kicked in immediately. She hurried toward the door, throwing it open just as the woman collapsed onto the sidewalk, clutching the child to her chest. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Kate called as she rushed to her side. The woman looked up at her, her face flushed with exhaustion, tears welling in her eyes. "My baby, she's been sick for days. I don't know what to do. No one will help me." Kate knelt down beside her, her hands gentle as she took the child into her arms, feeling the fever that burned beneath the small body. "It's all right," she said softly, though her heart ached at the sight of the child. "Let's get her inside." The woman's grateful tears flowed freely now, and Kate didn't hesitate to scoop the child up in her arms. She carried the girl into the small storefront, the woman following close behind. Kate laid the child down on the rickety table and began to examine her immediately, checking for signs of dehydration or more serious illness. A few people had gathered around the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Some stood back, others leaned in with cautious interest. A few murmurs floated in the air, some skeptical, others hopeful. As Kate worked quickly but with steady hands, she felt the eyes on her, but she didn't let it distract her. She wasn't here for approval, she was here to help, and the girl's life mattered more than anything. With a final touch to the child's forehead, Kate stood up. "She's severely dehydrated, but I can help her. I'll need some water, cloths, and if anyone has any blankets, that would help." A few of the townsfolk, still watching from the doorway, hesitated, but then a woman stepped forward. A neighbor, Kate gathered from the way she had been eyeing the scene. "I'll fetch some blankets," the woman said, her voice hesitant but determined. A couple of others made their way into the clinic as well, bringing water and other supplies, and for the first time, Kate felt a spark of optimism. There were those who were willing to give her a chance, even if the majority of the town still doubted. Just as she turned to attend to the child, a harsh voice broke the silence. Well, if it isn't the new doctor come to save the day." Kate turned, her spine straightening instinctively. Dr. Banning stood in the doorway, his hands on his hips, a sneer curling his lips. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his once pristine white coat now stained with the marks of his work. His graying hair was neatly combed, but the sharp lines of his face betrayed a man who wasn't used to being questioned or challenged. "You," he said, his eyes narrowing, "are playing a dangerous game. You think you can just come here, open up shop, and help people like you know what you're doing? This town won't trust you, Miss Morgan, and if anything goes wrong here, they'll come to me, not you." Kate met his gaze with unwavering determination. "I'm not here to play games, Dr. Banning. I'm here to help. You may have your practice, but I'm not going anywhere." His eyes glinted with condescension. "We'll see about that, won't we?" he said, before turning and walking out the door, his boots echoing with authority. Kate stood there for a moment, watching the door swing shut behind him. The tension in her chest remained, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She couldn't afford to let him rattle her, not now. There was too much at stake. As she looked down at the child, still lying on the table with her feverish brow, Kate's resolve only hardened. She would prove herself. She would show Dr. Banning and everyone in Granite Bluff that she was capable of so much more than they could ever imagine. She turned back to the child, her hands gentle, her heart steadfast. It was time to begin. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the stillness of the night, the sound echoing through the empty streets like a cruel reminder of the dangers that lurked just outside the safety of Kate's modest clinic. She froze, the book she had been reading slipping from her fingers, forgotten, as her heart began to race in the sudden, oppressive silence that followed. She stood up quickly, the lamp beside her flickering as though disturbed by the tension in the air. Kate's breath came a little faster than she liked as she made her way toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out into the dim street. The soft glow from the saloon across the way cast long shadows on the ground, the murmur of voices barely audible in the distance. Then she saw them. 2 men, their figures dark and ragged, struggling to carry a third who appeared to be crumpling in on himself, blood staining his shirt. Kate's breath hitched. The man was clearly in need of urgent care. She grabbed her medical bag without hesitation, her fingers brushing against the smooth leather, heart racing. There was no time to second-guess herself. She'd trained for this, she could handle it. Still, her mind churned with a mix of dread and determination as she dashed out the door and down the steps. Onlookers were already gathering, murmurs of disbelief filling the air as they watched the 2 men drag the third toward the saloon. Kate pushed through them without a word, knowing there would be no time for pleasantries. She only had one goal: get to him, help him, save him. The saloon door swung open with a creak, and Kate stepped inside, the warmth of the room hitting her all at once, mingled with the stench of stale whiskey and sweat. The low hum of a poker game at the far table halted as soon as she entered, every eye in the room turning toward her. A quiet tension rippled through the crowd. The man they dragged, was a stranger. He was tall, rugged with dark hair matted with sweat, a grimace of pain contorting his features. Blood stained the front of his shirt, and his breath came in shallow, painful gasps. The men who had brought him in stood back, unsure of what to do next, their eyes flicking between Kate and the still figure on the table. "She ain't a doctor, is she?" someone muttered from the corner. Another voice cut in. "Let the real doctor handle this." But Kate didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward, her eyes already assessing the situation. Without a word, she moved swiftly, pushing the men aside. "Get some clean cloths and boil water," she instructed, her voice calm yet unwavering. Her hands were already at work, removing the man's blood-soaked coat, her fingers brushing over his skin as she sought the source of the wound. A grunt of pain came from the man, and she glanced up briefly, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was a flicker of surprise in them. Surprise and something else. Something guarded? But it was quickly replaced by pain as he grimaced, his body trembling with every breath. "Don't move," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I need to see the wound." She had no intention of leaving him to suffer or allowing the men to handle it. It wasn't that she thought them incapable, but there was a finality in her hands that only she could control. As she lifted his shirt, she saw the gaping wound, right in his side, the blood still flowing, slow but steady. The bullet had to come out before it did any more damage. She took a steadying breath, and without waiting for a response from anyone, she set to work. The saloon had gone eerily quiet as she moved with practiced precision, her hands steady despite the pressure. She was aware of the eyes on her, but none of that mattered. The man on the table did. A man, rough and grizzled, took a step forward, his voice low. "You sure you know what you're doing, lady?" Kate glanced up at him, meeting his gaze coolly, but her hands didn't stop moving. "I'm sure." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no turning back now. They could either trust her or not, but this man needed her, and she wasn't about to back down. "Needle," Kate said, and one of the men fumbled through a cabinet to fetch a clean one. As she worked to extract the bullet, she could feel the stranger's gaze on her, a quiet weight in the air between them. Despite the blood and the danger, there was something about him, something in the intensity of his eyes, something that stirred a faint recognition deep inside her. She focused on the task at hand, but the thought lingered. How did he end up like this? And why did he feel so familiar? The saloon doors swung open, and Dr. Banning stormed in, his coat billowing behind him. His gaze immediately found Kate, his face pinched with anger. "What is this nonsense?" he barked, his tone like a slap. "Who gave you permission to interfere, Miss Morgan?" Kate glanced up, her gaze unwavering as she continued to work. "I did," she replied, her voice cool despite the tension that threatened to rise. "I'm the one who's actually trained to handle this." Banning took a step forward, his expression twisting with condescension. "You're out of your element, woman. This is a job for someone who knows what they're doing, not a girl playing doctor." Kate's eyes flashed, but she didn't let his words unnerve her. She removed the bullet carefully, wiping away the excess blood with the back of her sleeve. "If you'd like to step in, Dr. Banning, please feel free," she said. "I'm sure he'd prefer to be dead than have me finish this." A beat of silence stretched between them, but Will, who had been silent up until now, shifted slightly. His voice rough. "Let her finish," he said, his eyes locked on Kate. "She knows what she's doing." A look of surprise crossed Banning's face at Will's words, but he didn't argue further. Kate worked with precision, and finally the bullet was out. She bound the wound with clean cloth, her hands moving with a practiced rhythm, the work almost soothing in its predictability. Once she finished, she sat back and breathed a quiet sigh of relief. Will's breathing had steadied, and though he still looked pale, there was a hint of color returning to his face. "All done," Kate murmured, her voice softer now, almost tender. One of the men in the room nodded. "She knows what she's doing, all right." The others seemed to relax, though their eyes were still full of skepticism. As they moved to help him up, Kate hesitated for a moment, the memory of Will's intense gaze still lingering in her thoughts. She had done her job, but something about the way he looked at her, the way his eyes seemed to study her, made her heart flutter. The men carried Will toward the door, but Kate stopped them. "Take him to my clinic," she said, the words slipping out before she had time to think. "I'll need to monitor him further." They nodded and carried him out without protest. Kate lingered for a moment, watching the door close behind them, the hum of voices in the saloon picking back up again. Her hand rested on the table, her fingers still tingling from the contact with the stranger's skin. Why did it feel like something had just begun? Something that she hadn't quite prepared for. With a shake of her head, she moved to gather her things, pushing the feeling aside. The job was far from over, and if Granite Bluff wanted to see what a woman doctor could do, they were about to find out. Chapter 2: Healing and Hostility. Kate stood over Will, her fingers gently checking the bandages she had applied the night before. His skin was still warm, the fever stubbornly refusing to loosen its grip on him. He lay in the bed she had set up in the corner of her small clinic, his rugged features relaxed in unconsciousness, though the stillness was deceptive. His body trembled occasionally, betraying the toll the bullet wound had taken on him. Kate carefully adjusted the cloth, her hands working methodically as she avoided looking directly at him. There was no need to, really. He was a patient, and her only concern should be his recovery. Still, she couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt toward him, something that went beyond mere professional duty. It was as though a thread tied her to him, something invisible but palpable. Will groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. The pain was evident on his face as he shifted, trying to sit up. "Easy," Kate murmured, pushing his shoulder gently back onto the pillow. "Stay still. You've been through quite a bit." He scowled, but didn't protest, lying back down with a grunt of frustration. "I didn't ask for this." "No one ever does," Kate replied, her voice steady but tinged with the warmth of sympathy. "But you're here now. You'll heal." Will didn't respond immediately, his eyes drifting toward the small window where the first rays of sunlight were creeping in. The silence between them was thick, and Kate didn't try to fill it. She moved quietly around the room, adjusting the bandages on his side with practiced ease, and then her eyes caught his again. "Why didn't you go to Dr. Banning?" Kate asked, her voice softer than she intended. She wasn't sure why she asked. Perhaps it was just the curiosity that lingered after their terse exchanges, or perhaps it was the realization that Will was not a man used to receiving care, especially from someone like her. He gave a dry chuckle, his eyes meeting hers briefly before they shifted away. "He's the last person I'd trust with my life." Kate felt a twinge of something unfamiliar stir in her chest. She nodded slowly, unsure how to respond to his words. There was a hardness in his voice, a world-weary edge that she couldn't ignore, the kind of edge that didn't come from simple gunfights. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant, "for helping me." Kate hesitated before nodding, her fingers brushing the edge of his blanket. "You don't need to thank me. I do this because it's my job and because I couldn't turn you away." The words came out a little sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. It bothered her, the idea that he might think her actions came from anything other than duty. Will's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he sighed. "Yeah, well, I don't trust many people. And you, Doctor, are the last kind I'd expect to find in a place like this." Kate stiffened, but she didn't let his words land as harshly as they could. He didn't mean them as an insult, she could tell, but the weight of them still hung in the air, a reminder of the judgment she faced every day in this town. "Maybe you'll come to trust me," she said softly, turning away to tidy the small desk in the corner. A few minutes passed in silence before Will spoke again, his voice low. "I'm not used to help." Kate's hands paused in their work, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected that from him, not from the man who had so easily dismissed her skills the night before. There was a vulnerability in his voice now, something she couldn't ignore, and it tugged at her heart in a way she hadn't anticipated. "You're not alone in this," Kate said, her voice firm, offering him something of a reassurance she hadn't realized he needed. She turned back to him, meeting his eyes. "You'll get through it. I won't let you bleed out on the floor." Will chuckled softly, though it was laced with a hint of irony. "Not how I figured I'd go, but I suppose if you're in charge of saving me, I'm in good hands." Kate didn't reply, only nodded and went back to her work. He had no idea how much those words meant to her, even if he didn't fully understand what was at stake for both of them. Later that morning, the town's usual hum had begun to pick up again, the clatter of hooves and wagon wheels filling the air as people went about their business. But Kate couldn't ignore the murmur that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The word was out. She had helped the gunslinger. It was a strange thing to be scrutinized by an entire town, but she'd faced worse before. She wasn't some pampered debutante who had never known hardship. Still, the whispers stung. She couldn't help but overhear one of the women from the general store as she passed. "Did you hear? That woman doctor treated one of them gunslingers. One of them wild ones," another voice, more cautious, added. "I hear she's got a steady hand, though. Saved 'em good, didn't she?" "Don't matter," the first woman scoffed. "She's consorting with criminals now." The judgment was thick in the air, more so than usual, and Kate could feel it with every step she took through town. She held her head high, though. She'd never let the town's whispers dictate her choices. As she reached her clinic, her chest tightened. A part of her wanted to crawl back inside and shut the door, pretend she didn't hear it all. But she couldn't. There was no going back now. Inside, her clinic was quiet, too quiet. She heard the faint rustling of paper in the other room and stepped inside. Will was sitting on the edge of the bed, his coat off, carefully folding his things. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about his character, perhaps more than his sharp words ever could. His gaze flicked up as she entered, and there was a brief moment where the air between them seemed to crackle. He was still a stranger, but something in the way he moved, the way he held himself, made her feel like she knew him better than she should. "I don't know how long I'll be here," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of hesitation. "But I wanted to help. You've been kind to me. I can do more than just lie around." Kate hesitated, then nodded. "You've done enough by just being here. But if you want to clean up or help out, you can. I won't stop you." Will's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right then. I'll start with the floor." Kate didn't protest. Instead, she watched him, her heart fluttering for reasons she couldn't name. They were both caught in this strange web of duty and something else, something unspoken, hidden beneath the layers of reluctance and pride. But the bond between them was undeniable, and whether either of them was ready to acknowledge it, the tension lingered in the air. Kate turned away, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't ignore the draw she felt toward him, nor the conflict that lay ahead, both in the town and in her heart. She had come here to be a doctor, to heal, to help. But somehow it seemed that saving this man, this gunslinger, was the most dangerous thing she could do. And yet, she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when the stakes felt higher than they ever had before. The sudden knock on the door interrupted Kate just as she was finishing a stack of medical notes. She stood up quickly, her body already tensing in anticipation of what was to come. The sound of the knock was more urgent than usual, and as she made her way to the door, she heard the voice of a man, rough, low, and filled with desperation. Doc Morgan, it's urgent, ma'am." Kate swung the door open to find a rancher standing there, his face drawn and panic-stricken. His wide-brimmed hat was in his hand, and he ran a hand through his graying hair as he met her gaze. "Doc, it's my boy," he said, his voice trembling. "He's sick, fever, bad cough, no sign of it easing. I've tried everything I know, but he's getting worse. I was going to call Dr. Banning, but hell, I don't know where he is. He's nowhere to be found." Kate's heart sank. The very fact that Dr. Banning wasn't there meant that the man was likely desperate, and that made this child's condition all the more urgent. "I'll come right away," Kate said without hesitation, grabbing her medical bag from the counter. She was already thinking through the symptoms he'd described, her mind spinning through possible diagnoses. A fever that wouldn't break, a cough, it could be anything from the common flu to something more dangerous. The rancher nodded vigorously, his face wrinkling with frustration and worry. "Please, ma'am, I don't know what to do. I'm scared for him." Kate didn't respond with empty reassurances. She only nodded and followed him out the door, her boots hitting the dirt with purpose as she moved quickly behind him. The streets of Granite Bluff were quieter than usual, the sun already beginning its descent into the late afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the town. They made their way to the rancher's small homestead just on the outskirts of town, the air carrying a faint hint of fresh-cut hay and sweat. Inside, the boy, no older than 6 or 7, lay pale and still on a cot in the corner of a sparse room. His mother sat nearby, her face streaked with tears, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her apron. The boy's little chest heaved with the effort of each labored breath, and his skin, though flushed with fever, was cold to the touch. Kate dropped her bag on the table by the bed and immediately went to the boy's side. She could feel the heat radiating off him even before she touched his forehead. The fever was dangerously high, his body fighting against something unseen, and Kate's mind raced through possible remedies. She could already tell this wasn't just a simple fever. She glanced up at the mother, her face a mask of worry. "Has he been coughing for long?" Kate asked, trying to keep her voice steady, professional. "For 2 days now," the woman replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It started slow, just a little at first, but now it's worse. He can hardly breathe." Kate gently pressed the boy's chest, noting the shallow, rapid breathing. His little lungs sounded congested, crackling with each effort to inhale. This wasn't the flu. This was something more serious. "You've done well to call me," Kate said, though her heart was heavy. "I'm going to need to act quickly. We'll start by getting some fluids into him, and I'll prepare a tonic for the cough and congestion." As she worked, the rancher stood off to the side, watching with skepticism. Kate could feel his eyes on her every move, weighing her every action. He wasn't convinced yet. No one here was. Not completely. Not yet. She prepared a mixture of herbs, including sage and wild mint, her hands moving quickly but with care. As she held the spoon to the boy's lips, coaxing him to take a small sip of the bitter liquid, the door creaked open. Will's voice echoed from the threshold, raspy but full of quiet authority. "How can I help?" Kate looked up to see him standing there, leaning on the door frame with an unreadable expression on his face. He was still pale from his own injuries, but his eyes were sharp, focused, watching, waiting. He hadn't come for praise, Kate knew that. He'd come because he believed in what she was doing, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe in her too. "Boil some water," she instructed without missing a beat, "and gather fresh towels. We'll need to keep him cool." Will didn't argue. He moved silently into the room, his presence steady and reassuring. He was there to help, nothing more, and something about his quiet support eased the tension in Kate's chest. She didn't have to ask for anything twice. He was with her in this. In his own way, he was already proving his loyalty. Not to her, perhaps, but to the work she was doing. The boy's breathing seemed to ease slightly as Kate continued her work, her hands steady and practiced as she applied cool compresses to his forehead, all while keeping an eye on the rancher's worried face. Slowly, the heat from the boy's body began to subside, and his breath grew a little less labored. After what felt like an eternity, Kate sat back on her heels, wiping the sweat from her brow. She could feel the eyes of the rancher on her, still filled with doubt. But now there was something else in his gaze, something grudgingly appreciative. She hadn't been the one he'd wanted to call, but she'd saved his son. "You did it," the rancher said hoarsely, his voice breaking. "You saved him." Kate didn't respond right away. She only looked down at the boy, whose breathing was now steadier, quieter. It had been a close call, but she'd managed. Will stepped up beside her, his face unreadable, but his presence solid and unwavering as always. He didn't say a word, but his eyes caught hers, and the silent understanding between them was palpable. They made a good team. After a long moment, Kate finally turned to the rancher, meeting his gaze with quiet professionalism. "He'll need to rest for a while. Keep him hydrated and monitor his temperature. If anything changes, send word." The rancher, still in shock from what had just happened, nodded fervently. Of course, thank you, ma'am." Kate stepped back, letting the rancher and his wife settle beside their child. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This was it, the turning point. She had saved the boy's life, and perhaps more than that, she had saved her reputation. There would still be those who doubted her, who questioned her presence in Granite Bluff, but there were also those who would remember this moment. And as long as she could save lives, the rest of them could go on thinking whatever they liked. The rancher reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he took hers in gratitude. "We'll be forever grateful, Doc." Kate nodded but didn't reply. Instead, she glanced toward Will, who had stepped back to give them space. His steady gaze met hers, and in that silent moment, a small unspoken bond formed between them. The rancher's words still echoed in her mind, but they held less weight now. She wasn't just a woman with a medical bag anymore. She was a doctor, a healer. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to earn the trust she'd come to find in this town. The creak of the boarding house door opening stirred Kate from her quiet thoughts as she stepped into the small, cozy dining room. The flickering lanterns cast a soft, golden light across the table, where Mr. Goodwin had already set out a modest meal. A steaming pot of stew, crusty bread, and a pitcher of water were all placed carefully on the table. Will was already sitting there, his broad shoulders hunched slightly forward, his eyes distant. He wasn't looking at her, but rather at the window, his gaze lost in the flickering shadows cast by the setting sun. Kate hesitated for just a moment, watching him, wondering what thoughts were hidden behind that guarded expression of his. She had come to know him as someone who was both fiercely independent and quietly suffering in his own way, but there was something else about him. Something she couldn't quite place. "Will," Kate greeted softly, her voice a mix of warmth and curiosity. "I didn't think you'd be joining me for dinner tonight." Will's gaze shifted to her, and though his features remained mostly neutral, there was a slight softening of his eyes when he met hers. "I was getting tired of staring at the four walls of that room. Figured a meal with some company might help." She smiled and took a seat across from him, the warmth from the fire nearby soothing her as she set her medical bag down beside her chair. "I'm glad you decided to join me." Mr. Goodwin, bustling around the kitchen, offered a friendly nod. "Figured you both could use a little peace tonight. Don't get too many moments like this around here." Will's mouth curled up into a faint smile at that, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Peace, huh?" he muttered under his breath, and Kate caught the edge of cynicism in his tone. They ate in silence for a while, the clink of cutlery and the soft murmur of Mr. Goodwin moving about in the background, providing the only sound. The simple stew was filling, though the saltiness of it didn't quite hide the earthy tang of the frontier. Still, it was comforting in its own way, and Kate found herself grateful for it, grateful for the peace of this moment. After the tension of the last few days, a calm evening with just a meal and conversation felt like a luxury. Finally, Kate broke the silence. "Tell me something, Will. What was it like? Growing up, I mean. I know I've shared a little about my past, about my family, but I'm curious about yours. Will paused for a moment, as though considering whether or not to answer. He pushed his plate aside slightly and leaned back in his chair, his expression distant, as if lost in the past. Not much to tell, really. Grew up on the move, never stayed in one place too long. My old man, he was always looking for the next big thing, so we'd pick up and go wherever the wind took us. Kate's brow furrowed slightly, sensing the reluctance in his voice. So you never really had a home then? A fleeting shadow passed over his face. Not the kind of home you'd want, no, but you learn to make do, keep moving, keep your head low. That's how you survive. He glanced at her then, his expression hardening slightly. What about you? What was it like back east? Kate hesitated, the memories rushing in like a tide she hadn't expected. The years spent in medical school, the hopes of becoming something more than what society expected from a woman. Her family, though well-intentioned, had never believed she could actually be a doctor. My family didn't think much of it, she said. Her voice steadied despite the sting of the memory. They never understood why I wanted to be a doctor. A woman in a profession like that, they thought it was unseemly. She paused, picking up her glass of water and sipping it slowly. I suppose you could say I left them behind when I came here. I knew I had to prove myself. Will's gaze softened, just for a moment, as though he understood more than he let on. Sounds like we've got something in common, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Kate felt the weight of his words, and for the briefest second she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to find someone who truly understood the path she had taken, the loneliness, the determination, the sacrifices. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away, focusing instead on the task at hand. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the tension between them easing slightly, when Mr. Goodwin suddenly appeared at the door with a letter in hand. "This here's for you, Will," he said, his voice low. "Came by earlier, but no one was around." Will didn't take it right away, his expression darkening slightly as he looked at the letter. The handwriting was neat, formal, clearly not from anyone in Granite Bluff. "From the east, I'd wager," Mr. Goodwin added, his tone filled with curiosity. Will didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and took the letter, his fingers tightening around the envelope. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something Kate couldn't quite identify. Will's jaw tightened, and he seemed to hesitate for a moment before he slid his knife under the paper to open it. Kate watched him, her curiosity piqued, but she said nothing. She knew better than to push. When he finally unfolded the letter, his eyes quickly scanned the words, his expression darkening with every line. His face became unreadable, a mask she had come to recognize. Something about the letter had clearly unsettled him. His eyes flicked to Kate for just a moment before he turned his attention back to the page. "Trouble?" Kate asked softly, her gaze fixed on him, though she tried to keep her voice casual. Will didn't answer immediately. He folded the letter with deliberate slowness and placed it back in the envelope. "Just old business," he said quietly, as though he didn't want to say more. But Kate could see the tension in his posture, the way his fingers curled into a fist by his side. She could sense that whatever was written on that page wasn't something he wanted to share. And for a moment, she felt a strange pull toward him, a mix of sympathy and concern. She opened her mouth to say something, to ask more, but before she could, Will stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'll step outside for a bit," he muttered, his voice tight. He didn't look at her, just moved quickly toward the door. Kate watched him go, her heart fluttering in her chest. The unspoken connection between them had grown stronger in the past few days, but now, with this new tension hanging in the air, she wondered where it would lead. Something in her stirred, a quiet worry for him that she couldn't quite explain. She glanced at the door as it swung shut behind him, feeling the weight of the moment. Her thoughts swirled as she sat alone at the table, the quiet hum of the boarding house feeling more oppressive than before. Will was a man full of secrets, and it seemed like every day there was something more to uncover about him. A part of her wanted to chase after him, to demand answers, to know what haunted him. But another part, the cautious part, knew better than to push. In the end, all she could do was wait. Wait for him to come back, wait for the answers that she wasn't sure would ever come. And as the night deepened, Kate felt a strange mix of concern and fascination stir in her chest. She couldn't help but wonder, what had he been running from? And what was she about to become entangled in? Her heart beat faster at the thought, but all she could do was sit back and watch, knowing that whatever happened next, it would change everything. Chapter 3: Seeds of a Bigger Dream. The steady ticking of the clock was the only sound in the small, dimly lit clinic. Kate stood by the window, her eyes drawn to the storm raging outside. The wind howled against the walls, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the room. But it wasn't the cold that kept her awake. It was the restlessness in her mind. She had spent hours tossing and turning in her small bed, the shadows of the night playing tricks on her as her thoughts churned. The town of Granite Bluff was so ill-equipped for medical emergencies, she could feel it in every corner of her clinic, in every whispered doubt from the townsfolk. She had done what she could, saved lives when given the chance, but it wasn't enough. She could see it now. What the town needed was more than this one-room clinic. It needed a real hospital. She paced the floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence, each step growing more determined than the last. Granite Bluff was a town that had nothing. A town where the idea of proper medical care was as foreign as the notion of a woman doctor. But Kate knew that it could be so much more. It could be a town with a place of healing, a place that would welcome the sick and the injured, a place where people could come for treatment and find something other than desperation. Her mind raced with ideas, with possibilities she had never dared to entertain before. A larger space, a staff, equipment, more than just the basics. A place where people could receive care with dignity. A place where no one would have to suffer because they couldn't afford help. A hospital. The thought bloomed in her mind, taking root and growing with startling speed. Kate's hands gripped the edge of the window pane as she stared into the night, watching the storm rage outside, the rain splattering against the glass in a chaotic dance. The storm mirrored the storm inside her, a whirlwind of ambition, determination, and the fierce desire to make Granite Bluff more than it had ever been. She couldn't do it alone, of course. She needed more than just a single room and a few medical tools. She needed a space, something bigger, something that would reflect the vision she had in her mind. Her breath caught in her throat as an idea sparked. An abandoned warehouse. She had passed it countless times while making her way to the clinic, an old rundown building at the edge of town. It had been empty for years, its once pristine exterior, now weathered by time, its windows broken and its doors hanging askew. But Kate could see beyond the decay. She could see the potential there, hidden beneath the grime and neglect. It was the perfect location, a space big enough to hold all the equipment and beds she would need, a place where she could build something real, something lasting. She wasn't sure how to make it happen, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't waste any more time. Granite Bluff needed this. She needed this. The next morning, after a restless night spent turning her idea over and over in her mind, Kate found herself walking beside Will toward the edge of town. He had approached her earlier, a quiet suggestion that perhaps he could help with something. "What are we doing out here?" Kate asked. Her curiosity piqued as they walked past the familiar buildings of the main street and into the less traveled part of Granite Bluff. "You'll see," Will said. His tone soft, though there was a spark of excitement in his eyes that Kate couldn't ignore. He seemed to sense the shift in her mood, the way her energy had changed overnight. His pace was steady, and his presence beside her felt oddly reassuring. When they reached the abandoned warehouse, Will stopped and turned to face her, a small, almost shy smile on his lips. "What do you think?" Kate's breath caught in her throat. The building was worse than she had imagined. Its brick exterior was crumbling, the windows shattered and covered with old boards. The front doors hung loosely on their hinges, barely held together by rusted nails. It looked like nothing more than a forgotten relic of the past. But then, Kate looked closer. She imagined the walls stripped of their decay, the windows cleared of the grime that covered them. She could see the vast open space inside. Room for beds, for medical supplies, for nurses to move about, for families to come and find relief. "I think it's perfect," Kate breathed. the words slipping out before she could stop them. Her eyes glowed with excitement as she turned to Will. "This is exactly what we need." Will didn't speak at first, his eyes studying the building with a thoughtful expression. "It'll take a lot of work and money," he said, his voice low. "It's not going to be easy." Kate smiled, the thrill of the idea outweighing the challenges. "I know, but I've seen enough of this town to know that it needs more than what we have now. It needs more than just me in this little clinic. It needs a place where people can come for real care. And this," she gestured toward the warehouse, her heart racing with the possibilities, "this is the place that can give it to them." Will looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. There was something unspoken in his gaze, something that passed between them in that instant. Then, finally, he nodded. "I'll help. I can talk to some of the ranchers, maybe some of the travelers I know. If we can get enough people on board, we might be able to gather the resources." Kate's heart lifted at his words, the weight of the moment sinking in. He was offering his help, something she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't do this without you." Will gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "You're welcome, but you're the one who's going to make this happen, Kate. I'm just here to help." Kate smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at the unspoken understanding between them. They weren't just two people working toward the same goal, they were partners now, bound by the same vision. But as they turned to walk back toward the main street, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. Dr. Banning, standing just beyond the doorway of one of the nearby shops, his eyes narrowed in suspicion as he watched them. Will, ever perceptive, noticed the look as well. He stiffened slightly but said nothing, his gaze shifting away from the town doctor. Kate's stomach twisted. She knew what Dr. Banning must be thinking. The idea of a new, larger hospital in Granite Bluff wasn't just a threat to his position, it was a challenge to everything he believed about medicine in this town. She couldn't let his skepticism or his hostility stop her. Not now, not when she had come so far. But as they walked down the street, Kate couldn't help but wonder just how far she was willing to go, and how much of a fight it would take to make this dream a reality. Chapter 4. Tensions Rise. The thick aroma of fresh brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as Kat and Will sat at a corner table in the local diner, the clink of silverware and the murmur of low voices around them providing a strange sense of normalcy. It was the kind of place where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee, and the townspeople had no trouble voicing their opinions over a plate of eggs and sausage. Kate glanced down at the proposal she had prepared for the town officials. The ink was barely dry, but she felt the weight of the moment. The stakes were higher than ever. This was it. This was the chance to present her vision for a real hospital, a place that could change the face of Granite Bluff forever. Will, sitting across from her, didn't speak, but she could see the way his jaw tightened whenever one of the officials entered the room. They had made it clear that they weren't entirely comfortable with her idea, but today was the day they would decide whether to support her or let the plan crumble under the weight of their indifference. The town's officials filtered in, taking their seats around the table with gruff nods. There was Mayor Hawkins, a balding man with a permanent scowl etched into his face, and two of the town's wealthier ranchers, Mr. Turner and Mr. Pierce, who had been circling around the idea of a hospital for some time but hadn't yet committed. Behind them, as always, was Dr. Banning. His presence was palpable, though he sat silently at the edge of the table, watching them with a smug smile that Kate knew all too well. "Good afternoon, Miss Morgan, Mr. Reed," Mayor Hawkins began, his voice thick with disinterest. "I trust you've come prepared to explain this grand idea of yours?" Kate kept her spine straight, her hands folded neatly on the table as she met his gaze. "I have," she said, her voice calm and firm. "I've come to present a vision for a hospital that would serve the entire town, not just the few who can afford it. A place where families, ranchers, and travelers can find the care they need, regardless of their status." Her words hung in the air and she could feel the weight of them. The ranchers exchanged uncertain glances, but it was Mayor Hawkins who spoke next. "We understand the need for a medical facility, Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice gruff. But a full-scale hospital? That's a rather large leap for a town like ours, wouldn't you say? We've got our hands full as it is with the day-to-day workings of Granite Bluff, and the cost, well, the town simply doesn't have the funds for such a venture. There are other priorities to consider. Kate's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. She had expected this response, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. She had anticipated opposition, but it didn't mean she would back down. She took a deep breath before continuing. I understand the concerns, Mayor Hawkins, but I believe this town needs more than just a clinic. It needs something that will give people hope, something that will last. And I'm willing to do everything I can to make this work. I've already spoken with several ranchers and business owners who are willing to contribute. I just need your support to make it happen. Mr. Turner cleared his throat. And what about the cost, Miss Morgan? Who's going to pay for it all? We can't just raise taxes on everyone. The town's already struggling with the basics. He eyed her carefully, as though trying to assess whether her plan was worth the risk. Kate's stomach tightened, but she didn't flinch. I'm not asking for the town to foot the entire bill. I'm asking for your backing, to allow me to gather the necessary resources and labor to get started. Once the hospital is established, it will pay for itself. There was a long silence as the officials exchanged looks, none of them convinced. Kate could see their skepticism reflected in the way their shoulders sagged and their brows furrowed. Dr. Banning, his arms crossed over his chest, spoke up then, his voice oozing with condescension. You really think the people of Granite Bluff will accept a woman running a hospital? He said, his words cutting through the air like a knife, especially one who's so inexperienced. His smirk was unmistakable as he glanced at Kate. A woman with no formal training. What makes you think they'll trust you with their health? Kate's breath caught in her throat, but she held her ground. I've spent years training to be a doctor, Dr. Banning, more than you know. And if you think a woman can't do this job, then you're the one who's out of touch with what's possible. The tension in the room thickened. Will shifted in his seat, his gaze never leaving the table, but Kate felt the anger bubbling just beneath the surface of his calm exterior. He had never liked Banning, and it was clear that the feeling was mutual. The mayor cleared his throat, cutting through the growing tension. Perhaps, Miss Morgan, you should give us some time to consider all this. We'll get back to you. The dismissal was clear. Kate stood up slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Thank you for your time, she said, her voice stiff. She felt Will's eyes on her, steady and supportive, but she couldn't shake the frustration that simmered beneath her calm demeanor. She had come so far only to be met with this. Outside the diner, the wind had picked up, and the sky had turned a dark shade of gray, as though the town itself was mirroring the storm that raged in Kate's chest. Will walked beside her, his silence thick and heavy between them. That went well, he said, his tone dry. Kate shot him a glance, a small, wry smile tugging at her lips despite the frustration that clouded her thoughts. You could say that. They walked in silence for a few more moments before the sound of boots approaching caught their attention. Kate looked up to see Dr. Banning standing in front of them, his eyes narrowed, his expression hard. You're wasting your time, Reed, he said, his voice low and filled with venom. This dream of hers, it won't happen. And you'll be the one who'll pay the price for backing her. A man with your reputation doesn't have the luxury of making enemies here, not when your past can be dug up so easily. Will's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. You don't scare me, Banning. I've faced worse than you. Banning smirked, clearly enjoying the tension between them. We'll see how long that resolve holds, Reed. You're making a mistake, both of you. With that, Banning turned and stalked away, leaving a palpable unease in his wake. Will's fists were clenched by his sides, but he didn't say anything until Banning had disappeared from view. He won't stop until he gets what he wants, Will said, his voice tight, but neither will I. Kate met his gaze, her heart fluttering at the fierce determination in his eyes. She felt the same. She wasn't going to back down. She had come too far to be intimidated now. We'll prove him wrong, she said softly, more to herself than to him. We have to. Will gave a small, reluctant nod. You're not alone in this, Kate. You won't have to fight him alone." As they walked back toward Main Street, their shoulders brushing slightly, Kate's heart swelled with a new sense of resolve. The storm that raged inside her had only grown fiercer, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would build this hospital, and nothing, no one, was going to stand in their way. And yet, as they reached the end of the street, Kate couldn't help but feel that the battle was just beginning. Kate stood at the head of the half-renovated warehouse, the space still filled with the scent of dust and the weight of potential. Broken windows lined the walls, the early afternoon sunlight streaming through the gaps and casting light on the beams of wood and scattered tools that littered the floor. In the corner, a pile of fresh lumber and nails was stacked neatly, waiting for the day they could start the real work. The makeshift podium she stood behind was nothing more than a stack of crates, but the crowd before her didn't seem to mind. They had come for answers. Beside her, Will stood silently, his hands loosely folded in front of him, his eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. Though he hadn't said much, his presence was a solid reassurance, a steadying force that gave her the courage to speak without faltering. Kate took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying easily across the room. She motioned to the pile of charts and notes on the table beside her. "What I'm proposing isn't just an investment in a building. It's an investment in the future of Granite Bluff. This hospital will serve every person in this town, from the youngest child to the oldest rancher. It will provide care for those who can't afford the high fees of Dr. Banning's practice, and it will ensure that no one has to go without medical attention simply because they don't have the money." Her voice rang with passion as she continued, her eyes meeting those of the ranchers and merchants gathered in front of her. Some had come with genuine curiosity, others with skepticism painted on their faces. "We've all seen the need for better health care. I've already treated patients who otherwise might have died without my help. But we need more than a clinic. We need a real hospital, one that can treat the most pressing medical emergencies, offer preventative care, and provide a space for people to heal." She paused, letting the words settle in the room. Some of the ranchers nodded thoughtfully, while a few of the merchants exchanged uneasy glances. Kate knew she was treading a delicate line. Money was tight in Granite Bluff, and people were hesitant to spend on anything that didn't seem immediately essential. Will shifted beside her, his hand brushing lightly against her elbow. He didn't speak, but his presence was like an anchor, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone in this. She was grateful for him, more than she cared to admit. His belief in her, in the vision they shared, gave her the strength to press forward, despite the doubts in her mind. "I have already made arrangements with several businesses and ranches to help fund this project," Kate continued, her voice gaining momentum. "But we need more support. More people willing to see this through, to help build a hospital that will serve the entire community. We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for a commitment to the health and well-being of this town." There was a ripple of murmurs from the crowd, some positive, some uncertain. A few of the ranchers who had been more vocal in their support of her idea stepped forward, offering modest contributions to the cause. Kate's heart lifted slightly, but she knew better than to get ahead of herself. This was just the beginning, and not everyone in the room was convinced. As she continued to present her vision, explaining the layout of the hospital, the staffing she would need, the equipment she could procure with enough backing, she felt the weight of their skepticism pressing down on her. Some of them were still unconvinced, their faces etched with doubt. The financial feasibility of such a venture was a concern that wouldn't be easily assuaged. Just as she was beginning to wrap up, the creak of the door interrupted her. Kate turned, a sense of foreboding tightening in her chest as the unmistakable figure of Dr. Banning entered the room, his heavy footsteps echoing against the wooden floor. The ranchers and merchants fell silent as he made his way to the front, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Miss Morgan," Dr. Banning said, his voice thick with condescension, "I couldn't help but overhear your little speech. I must say, I'm quite surprised to see this kind of radical thinking spreading through Granite Bluff." Kate's jaw tightened, but she refused to let his tone unnerve her. She had expected this. He had been waiting for an opportunity to undermine her, and this was it. "This is a proposal to help the town, Dr. Banning," she said, her voice steady, though the challenge was clear in her words. to provide health care for everyone, not just the select few who can afford it. He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head as though she were nothing more than an errant child. "You think you can build a hospital here?" he scoffed, his eyes sweeping the room and landing on the dilapidated walls of the warehouse. "This town can barely keep up with the basics. And you think we're going to invest in this dream of yours? The funds just aren't there, Miss Morgan. And neither is the interest. What you're proposing will only attract unsavory elements and disrupt the delicate balance we've worked hard to establish." Kate's gaze narrowed as she met his challenge. She could feel the weight of the room's collective doubt pressing down on her, but she wouldn't back down. "Not now. We've already seen how things stand with the current system, Dr. Banning," she said, her voice calm but firm. "People die because they don't have access to care. People suffer because they don't have options. I'm offering a solution, one that will not only save lives, but provide dignity and hope for everyone who walks through those doors." Banning's smirk faltered for just a moment, and he seemed to hesitate, as if unsure how to proceed. Kate took advantage of his momentary hesitation, turning to the ranchers and merchants who had been watching this exchange closely. "Dr. Banning may have his doubts," Kate said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "But I ask you to look beyond that. Look at what we could accomplish together. Look at what we could build. This hospital will be the heart of Granite Bluff, a place where people will come for healing, where the community can come together, not just to survive, but to thrive." There was a long silence, and for a moment it seemed like her words had finally struck a chord. Several ranchers shifted in their seats, exchanging uncertain glances. Finally, Mr. Pierce, one of the more influential merchants, stood up and cleared his throat. "I think Miss Morgan has a point," he said, his voice hesitant but growing stronger with each word. "Maybe it's time we thought beyond the immediate cost and looked at the long-term benefit. A proper hospital would make this town stronger, and I think we'd be foolish to ignore that." Kate felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't allow herself to show her relief. She held her breath as more of the attendees began to nod in agreement, some even pledging small contributions. The tide was turning, but it was far from won. Later that afternoon, as the meeting wrapped up and the crowd began to thin, Kate felt a surge of hope rising within her. She had made progress, real progress, but just as she was about to leave, Will, who had been standing quietly by her side the whole time, caught her eye. A man stood just inside the doorway, watching them with a familiar, cold gaze. Will stiffened, his expression darkening as he recognized the man. His posture shifted, becoming more rigid, as though bracing for a storm. Kate's heart skipped a beat as she followed Will's gaze. The man was familiar to her, too. An old, dangerous enemy from Will's past, someone whose presence in Granite Bluff spelled trouble. The man's eyes met Will's with an unspoken challenge, and Kate felt a chill race down her spine. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice low. Will didn't answer immediately. He simply turned to her, his jaw tight with resolve. "Trouble's coming," he muttered, "and this time, I don't know if we'll be able to stop it." As Will's old enemy stepped into the room, Kate's heart raced. She had no idea what kind of trouble this man was bringing with him, but she knew one thing for certain. The battle for Granite Bluff had only just begun. Chapter 5. A Shadow from the Past. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the dusty streets of Granite Bluff as Will and Kate walked side by side toward the boarding house. The day had been long, filled with the usual demands of the town and the growing responsibilities of the hospital project. Yet there was a strange calm between them, a quiet understanding that came from shared work, shared struggle, and perhaps the unspoken bond that had been growing stronger between them. Will, his gait slow and deliberate, seemed to carry some weight. Kate couldn't quite understand, though she had learned not to press him. He had grown quieter in the past few days, but she hadn't asked him why. She could sense something lingering in him, some tension, but it wasn't until they turned the corner onto Main Street that she saw it. Something shifting in his posture. Without warning, a wiry figure stepped into their path, blocking their way. He was tall but lean, with sharp, angular features, and his eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on Will with an intensity that sent a shiver through Kate's spine. The man's mouth curled into a sneer as he crossed his arms. "Well, if it ain't Will Reed," the man said, his voice gravelly, almost mocking. "Been a while, hasn't it?" Will froze, his body tensing visibly. Kate saw it immediately, the subtle shift in his stance, the hardening of his jaw. She stepped closer to him instinctively, her hand brushing against his arm, a silent question in her eyes. "Jeb Lawson?" Will muttered under his breath, his voice tight with the weight of recognition. He looked at the man but didn't move, his eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Jeb, or Snake Eyes as he was known, smirked as he took a step closer, his boots scraping against the dirt. "What's a man like you doing in a town like this? I thought you'd be long gone by now." Kate could feel the tension rising, thick and oppressive in the air. There was history between them, something dark and unsaid. She glanced at Will, catching a glimpse of the shadow in his eyes, a flicker of the man he had been before this town and this life had claimed him. It unsettled her, like seeing the edge of a cliff, the drop too steep and too dark to peer over. "I'm not looking for trouble, Jeb," Will said, his tone colder now. "I've got no interest in rehashing old scores." Jeb laughed, a low, mocking sound. "Old scores? You make it sound so innocent. But you know, Reed, the past has a way of catching up with you, and when it does, well, it doesn't let go so easy." He stepped forward again, his presence looming. "You've got your little life here, your little dreams, but don't think for a second that I'm gone for good. Not when there's unfinished business between us." Will's hand twitched, and Kate could feel the heat of anger radiating off him, but he didn't move. He stood his ground, his expression set, though she could see the veins in his neck tightening with restrained emotion. His voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "I'm done with you, Jeb. Stay out of my way, and we won't have any problems." Jeb took one last look at Will, his sneer still in place. He turned to Kate then, his gaze cold and calculating. "I don't know what you see in him, lady, but I can guarantee you this, your little world is about to get a whole lot more complicated." With that, he spat on the ground and walked past them, his boots echoing against the street as he made his way toward the saloon. Will didn't turn to watch him go. He stood there for a moment longer, his back rigid, before he slowly exhaled, the tension in his body easing just a fraction. Kate, still standing beside him, watched the man disappear down the street, her heart racing from the confrontation. She could feel the weight of the words Jeb had thrown at Will, the implications hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. She turned to Will, searching his face for some sign of what to do next. "You knew him, didn't you?" she asked softly, her voice full of quiet concern. "Before all this, when you were running?" Will met her gaze, and for a moment, Kate could see something flicker in his eyes. Something guarded, something old. He looked away quickly, his jaw tightening again as he shoved his hands in his pockets. "It doesn't matter, Kate. That part of my life is over," he said, his voice rough. "It's behind me." Kate didn't say anything, but she couldn't shake the unease that crept into her chest. She had seen it in his eyes. The remnants of a past that hadn't let go of him. She knew there were things he wasn't ready to share, things he wasn't prepared to face. And she could sense that Jeb's presence was only the beginning of whatever storm was brewing on the horizon. Later that evening, after the unsettling encounter with Jeb, Kate and Will sat at the small table in the boarding house, the flickering light from the lantern casting soft shadows across their faces. Mr. Goodwin had provided a simple dinner, and they ate in relative silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound between them. Kate couldn't concentrate on the food, though. Her mind kept returning to Jeb, to Will's strained expression, and to the unspoken weight that had fallen between them after the confrontation. Finally, she set her fork down and turned to Will, her voice quiet but persistent. "Will, you have to tell me about him," she said, her words coming out more urgently than she'd intended. "Jeb, he's a part of your past, I know that, but you can't just ignore it. He's not going away." Will's hands froze, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. He stared down at his plate, his expression guarded, as though considering whether to tell her the truth or shield her from it. Finally, he sighed, the weight of years behind the sound. "I was part of a gang, Kate," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "A rough one. We did things I'm not proud of." Jeb was part of it, but he was always the worst of the lot. The kind of man who doesn't care about anything but himself and his own gain. Kate's heart tightened as she listened, her mind trying to piece together the image of the man sitting before her with the man he had once been. She couldn't reconcile the Will she knew, the quiet, steady man with the resolve to build a future, with the rough, dangerous past he spoke of. "I don't like talking about it," Will added, his voice raw. "It's behind me now, but Jeb? He's the kind of man who doesn't let go. He'll do whatever he can to drag you back into that world, and he won't stop until he's finished what he started." Kate reached across the table, her hand gently resting on his. "You don't have to face this alone, Will," she said softly. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." For a moment, he didn't respond, his gaze intense as he stared at her hand on his. The silence between them stretched, heavy and uncertain, until he finally spoke again, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't want to drag you into this, Kate. You've got enough to worry about with the hospital, with everything. You don't need this hanging over you." "I've already made my choice," she replied firmly. "I'm with you, Will. I'm not afraid of what comes next, as long as we face it together." He looked at her for a long moment, and in that gaze, Kate could feel the struggle inside him, the internal war between protecting her and trusting her. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. Outside, the wind picked up, the rustling sound of it passing through the cracks in the walls like a warning. Kate could feel the storm brewing, both in the world outside and in the heart of the man sitting before her. Whatever came next, she knew this. She wasn't going to let Will face it alone, not now, not ever. And neither of them was prepared for the storm that was about to hit Granite Bluff. The clatter of hammers and the rhythmic sound of saws filled the air as Kate surveyed the warehouse with a sense of pride. The large, cavernous space, once neglected and abandoned, was beginning to take shape. The foundation was still rough, but there were now framed walls, a few sturdy beams set in place, and new wooden planks being nailed into the floors. The dust in the air swirled in the early morning light, which poured through the broken windows, catching in the beams and creating an almost ethereal glow. Will stood beside her, wiping sweat from his brow, his strong hands steady as he helped adjust a beam above his head. A few volunteers from the town had shown up to lend a hand, their presence a quiet testament to the growing support for the hospital. It wasn't much yet, but each hammer strike and each nail driven into place felt like a victory. Kate couldn't suppress the small smile that tugged at her lips as she watched Will, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had come to this town with nothing, carrying the weight of a past he preferred to forget. But here he was, standing beside her, building something that would benefit not only this town but future generations. She couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude for him, for his unspoken support. As the volunteers continued their work, a few townsfolk passed by the open warehouse doors, their eyes drawn to the progress being made. One by one, they stopped to offer their help, some bringing supplies, others offering small contributions of cash. "Here, Mr. Pierce, one of the wealthier merchants in town, said as he approached with a bundle of blankets draped over his arm. These ought to help. You'll need them for the beds once you get this place finished." Kate's heart lifted as she took the blankets from him, her hands trembling with the weight of his generosity. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." "Every little bit helps," he nodded, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not one for charity, but I suppose you're doing something worth supporting. Just make sure this place doesn't turn into a disaster. We've all seen what happens when people try to do too much too quickly." Kate gave him a reassuring smile. "I understand. We're taking it one step at a time, but this town deserves better care, and we're going to make sure it happens." As he walked away, Kate looked around at the growing pile of supplies, lumber scraps, tools, and a few more donations from locals. Each item was a small promise of the hospital's future, Every piece of wood and every handful of nails felt like a step toward making her dream real. She wasn't just building walls and floors, she was building a future. Will wiped his hands on his trousers and approached her, his eyes still scanning the room as though keeping a watchful eye on everything. "It's coming together," he said, his voice low but filled with approval. "It is," Kate replied, her heart light with the promise of success. "We're not there yet, but every little step counts." Their shared sense of accomplishment was palpable as they stood together, watching their vision slowly take shape before them. The mood was light, filled with quiet optimism. For a brief moment, Kate allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger than they had ever imagined. The afternoon stretched on, the sun high in the sky, when a shadow suddenly darkened the doorway. Kate was in the back corner of the warehouse, organizing medical supplies, when she heard a sharp cry of surprise from one of the volunteers. "What happened?" Kate called, rushing toward the front of the room where several volunteers were gathered around a pile of smashed boxes. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the devastation. The crates that had once held medical supplies were now broken open, their contents scattered across the floor. Bandages ripped, jars of medicine cracked, and a water barrel that had been filled earlier that morning now lay shattered on the ground. "Who did this?" one of the volunteers asked, her voice trembling. "This was all donated." Kate's breath hitched as she surveyed the damage, her mind racing to understand what had happened. But it was the scrawled message on the wall that stopped her heart cold. In crude, angry letters, someone had written, "She's no doctor." The words cut through Kate like a knife. The slanderous message was more than just an insult. It was a direct attack on everything she had worked for. It was a reminder of the resistance she had faced from the start. The town had its doubts about her, but now it seemed someone was willing to go to drastic lengths to undermine her. Her thoughts flashed to Dr. Banning. The timing was too perfect, the attack too calculated. He had warned her that she was overstepping, that she didn't belong here, and now it seemed he had taken matters into his own hands. Will, who had been at the other side of the room, approached quickly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. His jaw clenched, and his hand curled into a fist at his side. "Who did this?" he growled, his voice thick with anger. Kate shook her head, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but I have a feeling I can guess." Her mind raced as she realized the full implications. This wasn't just vandalism, it was sabotage. Someone wanted to make her fail, wanted to drag her down before she could even get started. One of the volunteers, a young man who had been helping with the construction, stepped forward, his face pale. "I heard rumors, Doc. People saying this place is a waste of money, that you're asking for too much. Some of them said it's going to ruin the town." Kate fought to keep her composure, but the weight of the words settled heavily on her shoulders. "This was supposed to be our chance," she whispered. "Our chance to do something real, to help people." Will's gaze flicked around the room, his expression darkening as he surveyed the damage. "Whoever did this isn't just trying to stop you. They're trying to break us, to make us give up." Kate's stomach twisted in knots as she looked at him. She had come so far, and now it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers, but there was no turning back. She couldn't let this defeat her. "I'm not going to give up," Kate said, her voice firm despite the fear that tightened her chest. "We'll clean this up. We'll start again. We're not letting anyone stop us." Will turned toward the door, his jaw tight, his body taut with anger. "I'll find out who's responsible," he said, his voice low, "and when I do, they'll wish they'd never crossed you." As he stepped out into the street, Kate watched him go, a sense of foreboding settling over her. She had never been one to back down, but as the door closed behind him, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could hold on before everything started to unravel. Minutes later, Kate stood alone in the middle of the warehouse, the silence pressing in around her. The volunteers had begun to pick up the pieces, but the damage had been done. The sabotage wasn't just an attack on the physical space. It was an attack on her dream, and she knew that the road ahead would be harder than she'd ever imagined. But for all the fear that gripped her, there was also a quiet, unwavering resolve. She wasn't going to let this be the end. Not now, not when she was so close. and as she looked toward the door, the place that could one day become a beacon of hope, she vowed to do whatever it took to see it through, no matter the cost. The tension in the town hall was palpable as the residents of Granite Bluff filled the creaky wooden seats, their whispers filling the air like the buzz of anxious bees. Kate stood at the front, her hands gripping the edges of the lectern as her heart pounded in her chest. She had been summoned here to answer for the vandalism that had taken place at the warehouse, but the weight of the accusations felt heavier than she had anticipated. Dr. Banning was already sitting at the front, his posture stiff, his eyes gleaming with a smug satisfaction as he prepared to twist the truth into something more dangerous. Now, we've all heard about the recent vandalism, and we all know what kind of damage it could bring to the good reputation of this town, Mayor Hawkins began, his voice grave as he addressed the gathered townsfolk. But I think we must also consider the bigger picture. Ms. Morgan's arrival in Granite Bluff, well, it's attracted more than just the curious. It's brought with it elements that this town doesn't need. Kate's breath caught as she felt the eyes of the room turn toward her, their gazes sharp and suspicious. She had fought so hard for this, fought for her place here, for the dream of a hospital, for a future where Granite Bluff wasn't just a town on the edge of the wilderness. But now, in this moment, it felt like everything she had worked for was crumbling. Dr. Banning rose slowly from his seat, his voice smooth and venomous as he added his own weight to the mayor's words. It's no coincidence that a gang like Jeb Lawson's would show up here just after Miss Morgan sets up shop, and now we've got vandalism and rumors of mysterious criminals lurking around. I'm afraid that at this rate, the town might attract more trouble than we can handle. Kate felt her stomach tighten. The insinuations hung heavy in the air, each word another blow to her credibility. Her heart raced as she opened her mouth to defend herself, but her voice faltered under the weight of suspicion. Dr. Banning, she said, forcing the words out despite the tremor in her throat. I'm only here to help. I've treated people who would have otherwise died. I've saved lives. The vandalism is just the beginning. Dr. Banning interrupted, his eyes narrowing as he cast a cold look at the crowd. I fear Miss Morgan's clinic will continue to attract unsavory characters. It might be best for the safety of Granite Bluff if we put a stop to this experiment. Temporarily, of course. Until the town is certain it can handle such dangerous elements. The room fell silent, and Kate's pulse thudded in her ears. It was as if the ground beneath her feet was crumbling, the floor suddenly slick with betrayal. She had come here to build a future for the town, but now it felt like the very people she had hoped to serve were questioning her. She could feel the gaze of the town leaders shifting, some of them already nodding along with Banning's words. I've already demonstrated my commitment to this town, Kate said, her voice rising despite the anxiety tightening in her chest. I've already treated those in need, and I intend to continue. The vandalism was an isolated incident, and it's already being addressed. You can't judge my abilities based on fear and unfounded rumors. I'm not going anywhere. But her words hung in the air like fragile glass, shattering under the weight of doubt that had settled over the crowd. Mayor Hawkins glanced at the other officials before clearing his throat, his voice heavy with reluctance. Perhaps we should consider closing the clinic for the time being, he said, his eyes drifting to Dr. Banning for approval. Just until we can make sure things calm down. Kate's heart sank. It wasn't just the threat of losing the clinic. It was the realization that her dream, her belief in the future she was trying to build, was being torn apart before her eyes. She stood there, silent for a moment, unable to speak as the room began to murmur again. Closing the clinic won't solve anything, she said finally, the words coming out quieter than she intended. If anything, it will make things worse. The people who need me won't get help, and that will only drive more fear and suspicion into this town. I'm not a threat to Granite Bluff. Her voice broke, the raw emotion in her chest threatening to spill out, but she kept her composure. She had to. She wasn't going to let Dr. Banning win, not like this. But the damage had been done. The seeds of doubt had already been sown. The meeting soon adjourned with no resolution, and Kate left the hall with her shoulders heavy, the whispers of the townsfolk echoing in her ears. Will was waiting outside, his brow furrowed as he saw the look on her face. "Kate?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. "They're considering shutting down the clinic," Kate said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "They think I'm bringing trouble to the town." Will's face darkened and he stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You know they're wrong, right? You've done nothing but try to help, but this..." He stopped himself, his eyes flickering toward the ground. "We knew it wouldn't be easy. They'll come around." But Kate wasn't so sure. The weight of the day settled on her shoulders like a stone. She felt a tremor of doubt creep into her thoughts. Was it worth it? Was it worth all the fight, all the pushback, the sabotage, the fear? That evening, Kate sat alone in her small clinic, the weight of the world pressing down on her. The clinic was quiet now, the only sound the occasional rustle of papers or the soft tick of the clock on the wall. She had expected a quiet evening after the chaos of the town hall, but instead, she found herself lost in her thoughts. She had built this clinic with hope, with dreams of a better future for the town. But as she sat there, looking at the modest supplies, at the empty spaces where the hospital should have been, doubt crept into her heart. Was she fighting for a dream that would never come true? Was she risking too much for something that wasn't meant to be? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the door, and she looked up to find Will standing in the doorway. He hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping inside. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Kate said softly, her voice breaking under the weight of her vulnerability. "Maybe I should just leave. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe it's better to leave Granite Bluff behind before I destroy everything I've worked for." Will's face softened, and he crossed the room to stand beside her. He didn't speak right away, his eyes tracing the lines of her face, the exhaustion and defeat etched into every inch of her expression. "You're not alone, Kate," he said quietly. "You don't have to carry all this weight by yourself." Her eyes met his, and in that moment she saw the conflict in his own gaze, the same fear, the same uncertainty that she was feeling. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. He was holding something back, and it was more than just the weight of the town's doubt. "You deserve more than this, Will," she whispered, her voice full of tenderness. "You deserve peace, a future without your past catching up with you." Will's jaw tightened and his eyes flickered away, but his voice was steady. "I'm not going anywhere. Not without you." Kate looked at him, her heart heavy with the unspoken bond between them. But as she sat there, the storm outside raging louder, she couldn't shake the sense that something bigger was coming. Something that would force them both to confront the past they'd tried so hard to leave behind. Her eyes fell to her half-packed medical bag, the tools she had used to heal the sick, to build a future. The storm raged on outside, mirroring the turmoil inside her. But the choice was hers, stay or go. And though the uncertainty was overwhelming, Kate knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Will stood in the shadows, just out of reach, his own heart torn between protecting her and shielding her from the storm they both knew was coming. Kate's hands trembled as she carefully opened the envelope, the thick paper creasing at the edges as her fingers slid beneath the seal. The letter inside was crisp, the elegant handwriting unmistakable. She had not expected this, hadn't even thought to entertain such an idea, but there it was. A proposal from a respected medical colleague back east, offering her a position at a small but reputable hospital. The words leaped off the page, promising the security she had longed for, the recognition she deserved, and the safety of a well-established practice. "Dear Dr. Morgan," she read aloud softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "it is with great respect that I extend to you an offer to join our team at St. Francis Hospital in Boston. We have heard much of your excellent work and would be honored to have you among our ranks. The position would provide you with the stability and resources you need to further your medical career. A position such as this could lead to great things, and we believe your talents deserve such an opportunity." The words were a balm to her weary soul, but they also ignited a flame of guilt and longing she hadn't expected. She glanced around the small, worn clinic, her heart heavy. This was supposed to be her future, this crumbling space that she had poured everything into. And yet, Here was the promise of a future in a place where her skills would be respected, where her reputation would grow, where her work would be supported by systems in place. Her mind raced. Boston was a far cry from Granite Bluff, from the dream she had so fiercely clung to. But the thought of a more comfortable life, of safety, of status, the temptation was overwhelming. She could have everything she'd ever dreamed of. A place in the medical world, a life without constant opposition, without the fear that one bad day could ruin everything. But then she thought of the town, of the people she had already helped, the families, the children, the ones who had no other option. She had come here to build something for them. She had come here to make a difference. Her fingers tightened on the letter, crumpling the paper slightly as she pressed it to her chest. The offer felt like an escape, a lifeline thrown to her in the storm, but could she truly leave? Would she be abandoning the people who needed her most? As she sat in silence, the weight of her decision pressing on her chest, a knock at the door broke her reverie. "Come in," Kate called, though her voice was distant, consumed by the thoughts swirling in her mind. The door creaked open, and Will stepped inside, his expression unreadable. His eyes flickered to the letter in her hands, the faintest trace of concern crossing his features before he masked it with a neutral look. "Everything all right?" he asked, though the question was more of a statement than an inquiry. Kate hesitated, then placed the letter on the table, her fingers trailing over the edges as she exhaled slowly. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I received an offer from a hospital in Boston. It's everything I've wanted, everything I thought I'd never have," she paused, swallowing hard. "And yet here I am." Will's eyes darkened as he stepped closer, his posture rigid. "It's tempting, isn't it?" he asked quietly, his voice low, as if afraid to speak the words that would acknowledge the weight of her dilemma. Kate met his gaze, her throat tightening. "I don't want to leave, Will. But I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting. Dr. Banning is pushing for the closure of the clinic at the town council meeting. They're listening to him, maybe even considering it seriously. If I stay here, it could all unravel. I don't know how to fix that." She looked down at her hands, fingers trembling as they clasped tightly together. "This place, this dream of mine, it feels like it's slipping away." Will's jaw clenched, his face hardening. He didn't speak at first, the silence stretching between them as he took in the gravity of her words. When he did speak, his voice was low and resolute. "You've already given Granite Bluff everything. You've fought for them, Kate. But you've also got to think about yourself. If this place is tearing you apart, maybe it's time to let go." He looked at her, his expression conflicted. Maybe it's time for a new chapter. His words stung, more than she wanted to admit. It felt like a betrayal, a part of her wanting to believe that they could find a way forward, while another part felt the quiet exhaustion of constant struggle. "You think I should leave?" she whispered, though she knew that wasn't what he meant. Will looked away, as if avoiding her gaze. "I'm saying you need to think about what's best for you. You've given so much here, but if it's too much, maybe it's time to walk away." Kate felt the knot in her chest tighten further. She wasn't sure if she could leave, not with so much at stake. But could she keep fighting if the town itself didn't want her? If she didn't have his support? If this town wouldn't even stand behind her? Could she keep pushing forward if everything seemed to be conspiring against her? That evening, Kate sat at the small desk in her clinic, the letter from Boston still in front of her. The wind had picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls, rattling the shutters. She had tried to focus on organizing the medical supplies, but her thoughts kept returning to the same place, to the offer, to the town, and to Will. Suddenly, the soft creak of the door broke her thoughts. She looked up to find Will standing in the doorway, his expression tight, his stance more rigid than usual. "I have to go out for a bit," he said quickly, though his eyes flickered to the letter before looking away again. Kate frowned, sensing the unease in his voice. "Will, where are you going?" He hesitated, his jaw tight. "I need to handle something that's been hanging over me for too long." "Will," she said, standing up and crossing the room to him. What do you mean? You're not going to do anything reckless, are you? Will's gaze flickered to hers, his eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite place. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it so you can stay here, so you don't have to leave because of people like him. He glanced toward the door, his voice low but determined. I'll take care of it. I'll make sure nothing stands in the way. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Kate stood there, frozen, her heart thudding in her chest. She had no idea what he was planning, but she feared the consequences of whatever it was. Later that night, after a restless hour spent pacing, Kate found herself staring at her half-packed medical bag. She had tried to convince herself that she had made up her mind, that she could leave the chaos behind. But a storm raged within her, mirroring the one outside. The howling wind seemed to echo her inner turmoil. She couldn't leave. Not yet. But as her hand lingered over the items in her bag, the weight of Will's absence gnawed at her, an uncomfortable emptiness spreading through her chest. She had never felt so torn, so uncertain of what to do. Outside, the wind howled louder, battering the clinic with the fury of a coming storm. And Kate knew, with a sickening certainty, that the storm wasn't just outside. It was inside her heart as well. She glanced toward the door, her eyes searching the shadows. Where was Will, and what had he gotten himself into, and what would happen if he didn't return? Chapter 6. The Hard Choice. The town council chamber was filled with murmurs, the air thick with speculation as townsfolk filed in to take their seats. The room felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in on Kate as she stood near the front, trying to steady the nerves that fluttered in her chest. Dr. Banning was already seated at the table, his sharp eyes scanning the room with a predatory glint, his smug expression almost a mockery of the situation. He had orchestrated this meeting, made sure everyone was here to witness the fallout of her ambition. He cleared his throat and the room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen of Granite Bluff, he began, his voice smooth and calculated. I bring before you troubling evidence of what I believe is a direct threat to the safety of our town. The recent acts of vandalism, as you are all aware, have been linked to Miss Morgan's so-called hospital plans. He paused for effect, letting the words settle in the air, heavy with accusation. It seems that the idea of a woman running a hospital has stirred up more than just goodwill. There are those who see it as an opportunity to sow chaos, to bring in outsiders, criminals even, and we cannot afford to have such a place here. Kate stood up straighter, her hands gripping the edge of the podium, her pulse quickening as Banning's words wrapped around her like chains. He had been planning this moment for days, using her clinic's struggles to his advantage, spinning her efforts as a threat to the community. She had expected this kind of opposition, but it still stung. I won't deny that this town has its fears, she said, her voice steady but firm. But I stand here today because the people of Granite Bluff need more than fear. They need help. They need a place to receive proper medical care, a place that isn't dependent on outdated practices or expensive travel to faraway cities. My clinic has saved lives. My treatments have worked, and the hospital I am proposing will help not just those who can afford it, but every person in this town. Her words rang out, but she could already feel the eyes of the council members on her, some skeptical, some uncertain. The crowd was divided, their whispers filling the space between her words. Some murmured their agreement, but others looked hesitant, unsure whether to back her or fall in line with Banning's arguments. She could feel the weight of their doubt pressing on her, and it was harder to ignore than she wanted to admit. But as she glanced around, her heart skipped a beat. Will wasn't there. He had always been her rock, standing beside her, even without speaking. He had been the quiet strength she needed, his mere presence grounding her when the world felt uncertain. But now, standing before the council, she was alone. His absence was like a shadow creeping over her, and for the first time since she had come to Granite Bluff, doubt began to creep into her heart. Dr. Banning has made some valid points, one of the council members, Mr. Turner said, his voice uncertain. Perhaps we should put this plan on hold until things calm down. The town has been through enough lately. Kate's heart sank as she heard the murmurs of agreement spread through the room. She had worked so hard to bring people together, to build something that could truly make a difference, but now it seemed like it was all slipping away. Without Will by her side, the weight of the decision felt unbearable. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold her ground. A lump rose in her throat as she tried to summon the strength to continue. But the words wouldn't come. She wanted to tell them about the patients she had helped, about the families who had walked through her door and left with a new chance at life. She wanted to show them that this was more than just a dream, it was a necessity. But in that moment, she wasn't sure if they would listen. Just when it seemed as though the meeting was about to dissolve into defeat, something unexpected happened. The doors at the back of the room creaked open, and a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Kate's eyes widened as a rancher she had treated months ago, his face weathered but grateful, stepped forward. His daughter, a little girl with golden curls, clutched his hand. Kate's breath caught in her throat as he walked toward the front of the room. "I'm here to speak on behalf of Miss Morgan," the rancher said, his voice rough but sincere. "This town has always been about community. When my little girl fell sick and I couldn't afford to take her anywhere, Miss Morgan was the one who saved her. I've got no patience for talk that tries to tear down someone who's trying to help. I've seen what she can do, and I'm standing here to say that we need that hospital." The room fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a breath of fresh air. Kate's heart fluttered with a sudden surge of hope as more faces appeared in the doorway. One by one, townspeople she had helped, people who had once been skeptical but had seen the difference she could make, stepped forward to speak. The elderly shopkeeper, his hands shaking but his voice strong, followed the rancher. "I had no one else when I broke my leg last winter. No one but Miss Morgan. She came to my house, even when it was too late for anyone else to help. She fixed me up, and I'm still here today thanks to her." His eyes glistened with emotion. "I don't care what Dr. Banning says. We need her." Kate's chest swelled with pride and gratitude as the room shifted. The support she had so desperately needed was here, but it wasn't just in the words they spoke. It was in their presence, their belief in her work. With renewed strength, Kate turned back to the council. "This town has already seen the difference a hospital can make. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about building something that will serve every person who calls Granite Bluff home." The council members exchanged glances, some nodding, others still unsure. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and Kate could see that the tide was turning. She wasn't sure if she had won them all over, but she had certainly given them something to think about. As the meeting adjourned with the council promising to postpone their decision, Kate felt a glimmer of hope, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Will's absence weighed on her as she rushed out of the hall, her mind already racing. She had to find him. She had to tell him that there was still hope. The town hall doors swung open, and Kate's heart leaped as she hurried outside. The cool evening air brushed her skin, but she barely noticed it. Will was the only thing on her mind. She walked quickly down the main street, her footsteps echoing in the stillness, but as she reached the edge of town, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. A shadowed figure was emerging from the alley ahead. Will. His figure was hunched, moving slowly as though every step took great effort. Kate's heart sank as she rushed toward him, her voice rising in panic. "Will, what happened?" He turned toward her, his face pale, blood staining his shirt. His movements were sluggish, like he was fighting to stay upright. "Will," Kate cried, her hands reaching for him as she caught him in her arms, trying to steady him. "You're hurt. What happened? Where did you go?" He tried to smile, but it was weak, filled with a pain he could no longer hide. "I had to take care of it. Jeb, he won't bother you anymore. I made sure of it." Kate's hands shook as she helped him sit against the side of a building. She could see the blood seeping through his shirt, the cuts and bruises on his face. "Will, you should have told me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to do this alone." But Will's eyes were already closing, the fight draining from him. "I couldn't let them keep you from staying. Couldn't let them take away your dream." He paused, his breath shallow, his eyes flickering with something between regret and determination. "I didn't want you to go." Kate's heart twisted, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, she wasn't leaving Granite Bluff. Not now, not when Will had already sacrificed so much for her. With tears in her eyes, she cradled his head in her lap, her heart breaking as she whispered the words that had been on her mind for so long. "We're in this together, Will, and I'm not going anywhere." And as the storm raged on in the distance, both outside and in their hearts, Kate knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The first light of dawn barely pierced the horizon, casting long shadows across the back streets of Granite Bluff. Kate's breath came in short, frantic bursts as she hurried through the cold, the chill of the early morning biting at her skin. She hadn't seen Will since the meeting, and a knot of dread had settled in her stomach. There had been no sign of him after he'd left, no word of where he'd gone. Her heart thudded with an urgency she couldn't shake, a need to find him that drove her forward through the quiet town. Turning the corner near the livery stable, her eyes scanned the shadows for any sign of him. And then, there he was. Collapsed on the cold ground, Will lay motionless, his face pale, his breathing shallow and uneven. The sight of him sent a jolt of panic through her chest. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she knelt beside him. His clothes were torn, stained with dirt and blood, and his body was cold to the touch. "Will," Kate breathed, her voice hoarse with fear as she gently shook his shoulder. His eyes flickered open, but they were unfocused, glazed with fever. She could see the blood still seeping through the rags of his shirt, staining the earth beneath him. With trembling hands, Kate quickly assessed the damage. His wounds, the deep cuts and bruises, the blood that stained his body. She didn't have time to waste. Her training kicked in as she fought to steady her breathing. There was no room for panic. Not now, not with his life hanging in the balance. She scooped him up, ignoring his weak protests as she lifted him, cradling him against her chest. "Hold on, Will," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. "I'm going to get you to the clinic." With every step, her mind raced. She could feel his body sag against her, his strength fading. The few townspeople that passed on the street didn't stop. Most looked away, too preoccupied with their own business to offer help. Kate didn't care. She didn't need their help. She only needed to get him inside, to stop the bleeding before it was too late. As she reached the clinic, her breath came faster, the weight of Will's body becoming more difficult to manage as she stumbled through the door. Her hands were slick with his blood, her fingers numb, but she didn't stop. She gently lowered him to the examination table, her heart racing in her chest. Will groaned as his back hit the hard surface. His eyes flickered open, his voice barely a whisper. "Kate, don't do this. It's too late." "Don't you dare say that," Kate said, her voice fierce as she began to work. She tore open his shirt, taking in the extent of the damage. Deep gashes, bruises, blood that pooled beneath his skin. She quickly gathered supplies, her mind a blur of motions. She had to stop the bleeding. She had to save him. With swift, practiced movements, she began to stitch the worst of his wounds, each pull of the needle a reminder that she couldn't afford to lose him. She worked tirelessly, her hands steady despite the shaking in her body. She couldn't think about anything but him. His survival was all that mattered now. The hours passed in a blur, the candlelight flickering dimly as the world outside remained cold and silent. Kate's hands were raw, covered in his blood, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. He needed her. As the night drew on, Will drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever spiking with each passing hour. Kate could see the struggle on his face as he mumbled incoherently, his words barely audible. His hand, still warm despite the coldness creeping into his body, clenched around her wrist as he muttered, "Jeb, don't let him. I tried to set you free." Kate froze, the words sending a sharp pang of realization through her chest. Her heart thundered as she leaned in closer, brushing the hair from his forehead, her voice barely a whisper. "Will, what are you saying? What did you do?" His eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, his gaze unfocused but filled with a quiet urgency. "Had to stop him. Jeb's gang, sabotage. Didn't want you to..." His voice faltered and his body tensed, the strain of his words too much for him. Kate felt her throat tighten as she realized the depths of his sacrifice. Will had gone to confront Jeb, had put himself in danger, had suffered these wounds to protect her, to protect the dream she had worked so hard to build. He had risked everything, and now he lay here, fighting to stay alive. Her tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away as she pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. She wasn't sure if he could hear her, but she whispered anyway, her voice thick with emotion. "You did all of this for me, for us, for the hospital, for Granite Bluff." She held his hand tightly, willing him to hear her, to hold on just a little longer. "I'm not leaving. You don't have to do this alone. We'll finish what we started. We'll build the hospital together. You just have to stay with me, Will." Will's breath was shallow, but Kate could feel the faintest flicker of strength in his grasp. She worked through the night, her eyes burning with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. As the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the window, she took a step back and surveyed the scene. Will's breathing had steadied, and the worst of the bleeding had stopped. He wasn't out of danger, but he had made it through the night, and that was something. Her hands, bloodied and worn, rested at her sides as she allowed herself a moment to breathe. Outside, the world was beginning to stir, the town slowly waking from its slumber. Kate closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude. But there was still work to be done. She wouldn't leave him. Not when he had already given so much. Hours later, after the worst of the fever had passed, Kate stepped outside, her heart still heavy with the weight of the previous night's ordeal. The clinic felt quieter now, the tension from earlier lifting just slightly, but her thoughts were consumed by the man inside, the man who had risked everything for her. She had been so close to leaving, so close to accepting the safety of the offer from Boston, to walking away from everything that had caused her so much pain. But Will had reminded her that there was something worth fighting for. That dream she had, the one she could barely hold on to in the face of all the resistance, he had given everything to protect it. Kate stood in the doorway looking out over the town as the first light of dawn warmed the sky. There was still so much to be done. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when they were so close. With renewed resolve, Kate returned to Will's side. There would be more challenges ahead, more hurdles to overcome, but as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came their way. And as she sat beside him, watching the man she had come to care for so deeply, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Together, they would face the darkness, and together they would see the dawn. The town hall was packed to the brim, the heavy weight of the room palpable as the residents of Granite Bluff took their seats. Kate stood at the front, her heart beating steadily in her chest, a quiet strength in her posture as she glanced around at the faces before her. Will stood beside her, his figure still a little weary from the battle he had fought to survive, but his presence was unwavering. He was by her side now, just as he had promised. Together, they were about to face the council and the town one last time. The final proposal for the hospital was simple yet powerful. It wasn't just about the building or the land. It was about the people. It was about making a difference, about giving this town something they so desperately needed. Kate had worked tirelessly to get to this moment, and with Will standing beside her, she could almost feel the weight of the past few months lifting. They had already weathered so many storms together. This was the last hurdle. As the meeting began, Mayor Hawkins called the room to order, his voice hesitant but cordial. The council members were present, sitting with their usual mix of skepticism and duty. Kate had become accustomed to their blank stares, but today she felt something different in the air. Something that hadn't been there before. A shift, perhaps, or maybe it was just the quiet power of unity that Will brought to her side. Dr. Banning was already seated at the far end of the room, his expression tight with concentration. He was always the one to speak first, to take control of the narrative, but today he seemed a little less sure of himself. Kate knew he wouldn't give up without a fight, but she was ready. She was more than ready. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Banning began, his voice smooth but laden with a calculated venom, "We are gathered here today to discuss the future of this town. It has come to my attention that there are some who wish to introduce a new medical institution, a hospital run by Miss Morgan of all people." His gaze flicked briefly toward Kate, his lip curling in barely concealed disdain. "It has been made clear by the recent attacks which I believe are directly linked to her hospital plans, that this is not a safe venture for Granite Bluff." The words stung, but Kate held her ground, her eyes steady on Dr. She could feel Will's presence beside her, steadying her, and it made all the difference. This was no longer just about her, it was about them, about the town and the future they were trying to build. Banning continued, his voice growing louder with each word. "I understand the desire for progress, but we must also consider the dangers. Miss Morgan's association with certain unsavory elements, the chaos surrounding her clinic, and now these criminal acts, it is simply not in the best interest of this town." Kate could feel the weight of his accusations, but she wasn't about to let him dominate this moment. As he finished his tirade, she stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the room. "I will not stand here and let my work be discredited by rumors and accusations," she said, her gaze unwavering as she met the eyes of the council. "I came to Granite Bluff because I believe in this town. I believe in the people who live here, and I believe in their right to proper medical care. I've spent every day working to build something that will last, not just for myself, but for everyone. My clinic has already saved lives that would have otherwise been lost to neglect. I have treated children, the elderly, families who have nowhere else to turn." She glanced at Will, her heart swelling with gratitude for his silent strength. "Will here has fought for me, even when I didn't ask. He's been by my side through every obstacle, and it's because of him that I stand before you today." There was a murmur from the crowd, some of the townsfolk nodding in agreement. Kate could feel their support, the quiet solidarity of those who had seen the difference she had made. But there were still those who remained unsure, still those who doubted her ability to lead such a venture. But that doubt was starting to crack. As she turned back to face the council, she saw the familiar faces of the rancher who had brought his daughter to her clinic, the elderly shopkeeper who had once been a skeptic but was now one of her fiercest supporters. They stepped forward, one by one, their voices strong and clear as they spoke. "I'm here to say that Miss Morgan saved my child's life," the rancher said, his voice thick with emotion. "When we couldn't afford to take her anywhere else, Miss Morgan treated her. And she didn't just save her, she gave her a chance to live." The elderly shopkeeper, his face lined with years of hard work, followed. "I'm still here today because of her. She fixed my leg when I thought it was too late. I don't care what anyone else says, she's the real deal. She saved more lives than any of us could count." Kate's heart soared as more people stepped forward to speak. One by one, the tide was turning, the balance of power shifting in her favor. The support she had longed for, the belief she had so desperately needed, was coming to life before her eyes. And then, just as it seemed the meeting was turning in her favor, Dr. Banning rose to his feet, his face twisted with fury. "You don't understand what you're doing," he spat, his voice rising in anger. "This woman, this doctor, has no place in this town. She's dangerous and she's dragging this town into chaos. If you approve this hospital, it will be the end of Granite Bluff as we know it." His words were harsh, desperate. He knew he was losing and he wasn't going to go down quietly. But Kate wasn't backing down. She was standing firm, not just for herself, but for the future she and Will had worked so hard to build. "I've given this town everything I have," Kate said, her voice steady but filled with conviction, "and I will continue to give everything for the people here. We all deserve a chance to build a better future. A hospital is a step toward that future." Her gaze never wavered as she faced the council, willing them to see the truth, to see that this was not just a fight for her, it was a fight for them all. "I ask only for the chance to help," she finished. For a moment, there was silence, and then, slowly, one by one, the council members began to nod, their faces softening. Banning's influence was slipping away, and Kate could feel it. She had done it. She had won them over. As the council adjourned, Kate felt the weight of the moment lift. but the battle wasn't over yet. The vote to approve her hospital was still pending, and she couldn't afford to celebrate just yet. But as the crowd began to disperse, there was a palpable sense of relief in the air, a hope that hadn't been there before. Suddenly, she felt a warm hand on her back, and she turned to find Will standing behind her, his face tired but filled with pride. He had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now, in the silence between them, she could feel his support more than ever. "You did it," he said softly, his voice hoarse from the strain of the past few days. "We did it." Kate smiled, a tear slipping from her eye as she reached for him. Without another word, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him close as the town around them cheered. There would still be challenges ahead, still obstacles to overcome, but in that moment, all that mattered was that they had made it, together. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the town of Granite Bluff buzzed with the news of the council's decision, Kate and Will walked side by side toward the warehouse, now destined to be their new clinic. The weight of the world no longer seemed so heavy. They had won, and with their victory, they were ready to face the future, whatever it held. Hand in hand, they stepped into the space they had dreamed of for so long, knowing that this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the freshly washed windows of the hospital, casting warm golden light across the room. It was the first official day of the new hospital in Granite Bluff, and Kate stood quietly at the doorway, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. The once empty warehouse had been transformed into a space brimming with life and purpose. Beds lined the walls, medical supplies were neatly arranged on shelves, and the air was filled with the sounds of bustling assistants and nurses, moving swiftly to prepare for the influx of patients. Kate took in the sight, her eyes gliding over the patients who had already begun to trickle in. They were the farmers and ranchers from the surrounding areas, the men and women who had been waiting for a place like this, for a chance to be treated with dignity and care. Some were injured, others sick, and some were simply seeking help they couldn't find elsewhere. But now, here, they were all given the same opportunity, a chance at healing. "Looks like it's all coming together," Will's voice broke through her thoughts, and Kate turned to find him standing at her side. He had been by her through every step of this journey, from the first sketch of plans to this very moment. His presence, once filled with the shadows of his past, was now a steady, unwavering force at her side. He wasn't just the man who had helped her survive. He was her equal partner in this mission. He had put aside his own demons, his own guilt, and had embraced a new purpose. One that involved not just his survival, but the survival of this town and, more personally, their shared dream. He was no longer just the gunslinger. He was the protector of something far more precious now. Kate smiled softly, glancing over at him. "It's everything I hoped for. The hospital. It's real." Will nodded, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the same sights she had moments before. "And you made it happen." His voice was quiet, but filled with admiration. "You've done something no one thought possible." She shook her head gently, a small chuckle escaping her. "We did it, Will. We did it together." She could feel the truth of it deep in her bones. This hospital, this future, was their shared achievement. It wasn't just her dream anymore. It was theirs. As they stood side by side, a nurse hurried past them, a young woman from the town who had volunteered to help. Kate gave her a warm smile, and the nurse nodded back, her face flushed with excitement and pride. The other nurses were already attending to the patients, the rooms busy but organized, the flow of people seamless. They had a long way to go, but this was a beginning, and with this beginning came hope. Kate's eyes wandered over to the far end of the room, where a patient lay on one of the cots. His eyes closed, his breathing steady. She recognized him. One of the ranchers who had been one of the first to support her. He had come in yesterday with a severe infection, but now, under the tender care of her team, he was resting comfortably. It was moments like this, moments where the work she had done had made an undeniable difference, that made all the struggles, all the setbacks, worth it. Kate turned back to Will, her heart full as she watched him. He had been the anchor she had needed in moments of doubt, and now, standing beside him in this room filled with promise, she could hardly believe how far they had come. Will caught her gaze, his expression softening as he studied her face. "I think you've done more than just build a hospital here, Kate. You've changed this town. You've given them something they've never had before." She smiled at him, her heart swelling with emotion, and we're just getting started. As the morning passed and the sounds of care filled the air, Kate and Will moved through the hospital together, offering kind words to patients and overseeing the flow of work. The new nurses, all eager to learn, looked to Kate for guidance, while Will stood by her, offering his quiet support. Together, they made an unstoppable team. Later that afternoon, when the hospital was quieter, Kate found herself standing at one of the windows, her hands pressed against the cool glass. Outside, the town of Granite Bluff stretched out before her, the streets lined with people going about their daily lives. But it wasn't just the town she saw. It was the future, a future that she and Will had fought for. Will joined her at the window, standing close beside her as they gazed out at the town they had fought to protect. He was still recovering, though the weakness from his wounds had long since faded. Now, as the sun began to set over the town, there was only a quiet strength in him, a man who had found his place in the world. She turned to him then, her heart overflowing with gratitude, love, and a quiet joy. "Will," she said softly, "I never imagined it could be like this. All I ever wanted was to make a difference. But now, with you here, I found something more than I ever thought possible." Will looked at her, his hand gently resting on her arm as he gave her a soft, affectionate smile. "We're in this together, Kate. We always have been. I never wanted you to face this fight alone." And then, without a word more, he leaned in, his lips finding hers in a soft, lingering kiss. The kiss was gentle, yet filled with the unspoken promises they had made to each other. Promises of love, of partnership, of a future built together. When they pulled away, Kate smiled up at him, her eyes glistening. "I love you, Will," he chuckled softly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I love you too, Kate. And I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." They stood there together, hands intertwined, as the sun sank lower in the sky. Outside, the town carried on, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding within the walls of the new hospital. But inside, it was the beginning of something much larger than the two of them. It was the start of a future built on hope, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that, together, anything was possible. As the last light of the day streamed through the windows, Kate felt the weight of the years of struggle and pain finally lift. The sun, breaking through the darkness, symbolized not only the hospital's future, but their future. A future they would build together, step by step, patient by patient, with love as their foundation. And as the first day at the new hospital drew to a close, Kate and Will stepped outside, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, with the knowledge that, together, they had already conquered the greatest battle of all.